At this point, we are going to add a new script to the chain base object. I'm gonna call this return last child. For all the children, add new script and call that the hook. Open the return last child script up. And the hook as well. In this script, we're gonna define last child rigid body field at first. And declare getLastChild method as well. This function will return us last child rigid body object. In this class, we will handle the collision between the player and the chains. First, we check if the player hits the chain or not. If true, we assign the parent of this object to the player's parent property. In this line, we first get the player's injoint component and assign it to a J variable. Then we activate the injoint component that is connected to the player. In this line, we assign the rigid body component of the last child of the chain base object to connected body property of the player's injoint from getLastChild function. And then we change player mode from normal to chain mode. In player movement script, we add another function and call that handle on chain player movement to handle the on-chain state mode for us. We call this function in here. First, create input horizontal variable to save horizontal inputs from keyboard. If input horizontal is greater than 0, else if is less than 0. Call add relative force instead of add force function, because we want to apply relative force to the chains in local space and not in global space. For the right, apply vector to that right, and for the left side, apply vector to that left. If we press the spacebar key on the keyboard, instead of jumping, we will unparent the player from the chains immediately, and we change the player mode to normal again. In these lines, we first unparent the player and getting the hinge joint component, and then we will deactivate the component again. At this line, we set null value for the hinge joint connected body property. In here, we change the mode. For connected anchor property, we define new vector as well, just like its default vector in hinge joint component. But before that, I'm gonna comment it out. In here, we will declare another method to return the hinge joint component attached to the player. In this line, I'm gonna replace this part of code with get hinge joint method. As you may notice, the hinge joint component is deactivated at first, so we should comment this line of code out and make the HJ field as a public field and assign it in the inspector. Now it's time to assign this field from the inspector for the chain-based object. Select the chain base and add this object to this field. give it a try. It's better to have a higher jump for player in game mode. So I'm gonna change the jump force value from 15 to 20. As you can see, whenever a collision occurs, the player gets stuck on the pieces of the chains. And we don't want this. We want the player falling all the way down to the last chain and then getting stuck on it. By considering some offset for the connected anchor property of the hinge joint component. To achieve this, stop the game and open up the player movement script. At first, copy and uncomment this line of code, and then change the y value to 0. By going to the hook script, I'm gonna paste the code in here. Create local RB variable and assign the last chain rigid body to it. And then assign the RB to connected body property of the player hinge joint component. In this line, we assign the chain position to the player position. These two lines of code are responsible for both positioning the player and setting the offset for it. Since we are manually changing the connected anchor value, make sure to uncheck this property in the hinge joint component for the player, and set the y value for the connected anchor property to 0. Run the game. Change the jump force value to 25 temporarily. As you can see, we no longer have a problem with the player here, but we need to change the gravity scale for all the chains in the chain-based object to make it look a little more natural. Stop the game and select the second chain all the way down to the last, and rescale the gravity scale for them in rigid body components. I'm gonna reset these values as well, and change them to -15 and 15 accordingly again.